The Old Ones were an ancient, technologically and psychically advanced intelligent species of cold-blooded reptilian beings, or they might have been an alliance of individual advanced species. They established an interstellar empire across the Milky Way galaxy tens of millions of Terran years ago. They ruled over the Milky Way before the development of most of the other sentient species of the galaxy we know of today. They may have been the first species to attain sentience in the galaxy, and the first species to cross the Sea of Stars, making them also the first star-faring species in galactic history. The Old Ones were the original crafters of the Webway, and may be the creators of the Eldari and many other intelligent peoples of the galaxy, such as the Slan and the Jokero, as well as the Krok, which also makes them the possible ancestral so-called brain boys of the Orcs. They were also the creators of the early tree-dwelling primate-like ancestors of humanity on primordial Earth, who eventually rose to full sentience. The existence of the Old Ones is known to humanity mainly through Eldari mythology and their long-ago war with the Necrons. The Old Ones became embroiled in a great conflict over 60 million Terran years ago with the Catan and their Necron servants, a war that they lost. After their defeat, they either went extinct or disappeared from the galaxy, their fate and destination unknown. Now, onto their history. They are an ancient, intelligent species of nearly immortal creatures of a slow and cold-blooded intelligence who may have been reptilian in nature. The Old Ones were probably the first species in the Milky Way galaxy to have evolved sentience, though the Catan, born at the creation of the galaxy, predate them. Despite their great age, the Catan did not partake in galactic affairs until the Necrontyr gave them physical bodies just before the War in Heaven began. As a result, the early galaxy was shaped solely by the Old Ones. They possessed extremely advanced technology and potent psychic powers that made them essentially the masters of the Imperium. It was they who first created the Webway that was later perfected and expanded by the Eldari servants, and they used its labyrinthine corridors to travel through the Imperium instantaneously, moving between pairs of warp gates established on many planets across the galaxy. A supposedly benevolent and gentle species, the Old Ones appear to have wished to nurture the younger, sentient peoples of the galaxy and spread life and intelligence across the cosmos. On their travels, they seeded many other worlds across the galaxy with life, and encouraged the development of indigenous intelligent life on many more, including Terra. On the primordial Earth, the tree-dwelling ancestors of Terran primates they had helped to evolve and set on the path to sentience were the direct evolutionary precursors of humanity. They were a part of the ancient aliens' interstellar ecosystem, but otherwise had no greater role defined for them. According to the Catan called the Deceiver, The Old Ones once waged a war against his race of energy beings known as the Star Gods. This was a conflict that they lost, and in the aftermath, they went into hiding in order to avoid the Old Ones' wrath until they were discovered by the Necrontyr. The creators of the Webway. The Old Ones were inherently patient as a species, and before attempting to journey out into interstellar space, they made an extensive study of astronomy and astrophysics, which led them to eventually discover the existence of the Imperium. At the time, the Monasterium was unaffected by the psychic emissions of other intelligent species, since there were so few present in the galaxy at the time, and it was a calm and steady realm of existence. They were able to exploit the Imperium, allowing them to travel across the galaxy at a whim through the development of trans-dimensional warp space tunneling technology and a network of warp gates, later called the Webway by the Eldari, that instantaneously connected their far-flung interstellar colonies. Such was the Old Ones' advanced science that they had the capacity to cross vast tracts of space with a single step by way of their Webway portals, and through such means they managed to spread their spawn to many other places. They believed that all life was useful and had value, and they are known to have brought about the rise of numerous new species and impregnated thousands of worlds with new life, which they made their own. The War in Heaven. Before the creation of the Eldari, the Old Ones were at war with the Necrontyr over 60 million Terran years ago, a conflict later remembered by the Eldari as the War in Heaven. One of the few already sentient species they had encountered as they traveled across the galaxy were the humanoid Necrontyr, who at the time were in the midst of a slow, sublight interstellar expansion to distant planets beyond their home star system. The lives of the Necrontyr were always short and painful, due to the deadly radiation of their world's sun and their evolutionary adaptations to it. When they met the Old Ones, they developed a deep, jealous hatred of the reptilian aliens due to their near-immortal lifespans. They are said to have petitioned them for the technological secret of eternal life, but they refused, engendering an even more terrible rage in them. This resentment led to the first interstellar war ever fought in the galaxy. Possessed of a far inferior technology, the Necrontyrs warred against the Old Ones to claim the secrets of life everlasting proved futile, and they were forced back to their remote world in the outer rim of the galaxy's halo stars. Their fury cooled over thousands of Terran years of imprisonment, but they eventually turned their hatred against their jailers upon all other forms of life. They had studied their star for millions of Terran years. In their quest for a weapon to use against the Old Ones who had prevented their interstellar expansion, they found the intelligent race of energy beings known as the Qatar. Gradually, they managed to communicate with these ethereal beings composed of pure energy who fed on the electromagnetic energy emitted by the stars. But the Catan knew they would never be able to fully comprehend the material universe without a material body. So, the Necrontyr built the living metal bodies from the alloy they called necrodermis that the Catan are still adorned with. They were soon worshipped by them as their star gods, as their powers and intelligence were far beyond anything the Necrontyr had experienced ever before, even in their encounters with the Old Ones. As the Catan became more manifest in their new physical bodies, they began to enjoy certain aspects of material life more, including the infliction of pain, suffering, and slavery, and discovered that the energies given off by corporeal life were far more savory than the bland solar emissions that had always been the mainstay of their diet. The Star Gods next provided the Necrontyr with an escape from the curse of their short lives. They offered to transfer their minds into living metal bodies comprised of necrodermis. They eventually tricked them into transferring their own consciousnesses into robotic bodies made out of the same necrodermis material. Once the Necrontyr had done so, they discovered, to their horror, that their new bodies erased their psychic impressions in the warp, effectively rendering them as soulless as the Catan themselves. Whether they knew what they would lose by undertaking this spire transference will never be known, but the process essentially destroyed their people. They gained the immortality they had so craved, but lost their free will. Their minds were dulled, and only a few members of the species, the Necron Lords and Overlords, retained any independent thought. Unfortunately, the side effect of the biotransference process was that the Necrontyr, now calling themselves Necrons, gradually lost the ability to feel any emotions at all, and became the soulless, mechanical slaves of the Catan, culling the sentient life forms the Catan now craved as sustenance in the terrible Red Harvest. With the birth of the Necrons, the Star Gods began the war against the Old Ones once more with their legions of undying warriors. The cosmic confrontation that would later become known to the Eldari as the War in Heaven. To combat these terrible foes, the Old Ones created new warrior races to battle for them, including the Eldari, the Rashan, and the Kanib. According to later Eldari legend, the paradise the Old Ones had created for their younger races was desecrated by the Catan, whom the Eldari knew as the Yingir. During ancient times, they learned a great many secrets of the warp from the Old Ones. From this knowledge, they developed the technologies that ultimately led to their own exploitation and expansion of the Webway in later times. Knowing that the Catan were highly vulnerable to psychic energies, the ancient masters had designed their new warrior species to be psychically linked to the Imperium and able to use its power in destructive ways. Unfortunately, the raw emotions and collective unconscious beliefs of these new sentient species altered the psychically active Imperium, creating both the entities later worshipped as gods by the Eldari and the demons of chaos. The introduction of these warlike and psychic races into the galaxy had the side effect of warping the Imperium. The death, pain, suffering, and destruction unleashed upon the galaxy during the conflict was reflected in the Imperium, literally changing its nature into that of the current chaotic and intrinsically hostile psychic dimension called the Warp. The innocuous entities composed of psychic energy which had naturally existed in the Imperium before the war were gradually twisted into voracious and hostile predators. By the time the Old Ones marshaled their forces, there were only 4 Catans still known to be in existence, but much of the organic life in the galaxy had already been extinguished. But the Catan's empire proved unable to counter the new form of psychic warfare unleashed by the Old Ones' warrior races. Eventually, in an effort to save themselves, the Catan and their Necron servants became devoted to severing reality's relationship to the Imperium in order to make psychic powers useless through the deployment of Blackstone-based technologies, including those later known as the Cadian Pylons. And yet, even as they seemed to finally be driven back, the younger race's psychic instability allowed the Enslavers, a terrible species of warp entities who could enslave the minds of psychers, to create living gateways into the material world for others of their kind to enter real space. From cracks in reality, these denizens of the warp sought entry into the material universe, which forced the Old Ones to bring about the emergence of even more new intelligent species to defend their last strongholds. Among their creations at this time were the green-skinned hardy Krog, who may be the ancestors of the Orcs, and the technology-mimicking orange-furred humanoids known as the Jokero. This enslaver plague further devastated the population of intelligent beings in the galaxy. The Old Ones were ultimately devastated by the aftershocks of what their psychically active creations did to the warp, and are now believed to have either gone extinct or fled the galaxy, though the Eldari later built an interstellar empire by extending what remained of the Old Ones' Webway into a warp tunnel network of their own. The Enslavers' depredations also made it impossible for the Necrons to gather enough sentient beings to feed the Catan's ever-growing hunger for life energies. At the same time, the Necrons revolted against their star god masters and reclaimed their independence, transforming the remaining ones into Catan shards, who could be used as living weapons against their foes. Above all else, their nobility now sought a way to reverse the process of biotransference and restore their organic bodies. But the galaxy had been utterly devastated, and the Eldari were clearly replacing the Old Ones as the galaxy's new power. Their civilization left in ruins by the war in heaven and their revolt against the Catan, the Necrons chose to enter hibernation on thousands of tomb worlds scattered across the stars, where they would sleep for tens of millions of Terran years until the Eldari Empire had fallen and the galaxy was ripe for Necron conquest once more. Now, for their legacy. The implacable onslaught of the Catan and the Necrons during the War in Heaven, combined with the transformation of the Imperium into an unmistakably hostile dimension and its unleashing of dangerous warp entities, ultimately destroyed their great civilization. It is unknown whether the species went extinct despite all its efforts, or its survivors simply fled the galaxy outright to find a less dangerous region of the universe where they could recover. The Necrons and the Catan took great pleasure in their victory, despite the fact that they could not enjoy it for long before they revolted against their masters, and so forced birth into hibernation for over 60 million Terran years. In the power vacuum left in the Milky Way galaxy after the Old Ones' disappearance, the younger races created by them, such as humanity and the Jokero, continue their evolution. Though now unguided, they began to develop in ways unintended by their original creators. The overall mantle of dominance over the galaxy would pass from the Old Ones to their successors, the Eldari, who had fought alongside them as their staunchest allies and most willing pupils during the War in Heaven. They would establish their own interstellar empire using the Webway, ultimately expanding and deepening its labyrinthine network. The Old Ones would long continue to feature in their legends. For instance, the rune singers of the Asuriani craft world K-Law told of how the Webway had originally been created by the Old Ones who used it to traverse the galaxy. Their legacy may contain more destructive elements as well. It is rumored that the empathic obliterator used by the Necron overlord Trazeen the Infinite was constructed using technology originally invented by the Old Ones. And now, to end things off, here are some of the most interesting references to the Old Ones. They were mentioned in Liber Chaotica Slanesh, in the chapter Echoes of the Birth, where they are called the First Ones. This section covers the Eldar species, stating that they were raised by figures of shadow and light that were an ancient as well as powerful alien race. These First Ones are said to be the first to have reached into the starry night, and to be older than gods, yet still mortals who are subject to time. The First Ones are said to have left the Eldar and returned to the sky in order to allow their charges to develop over the millennia. Afterwards, they returned in strange, vast vessels that were worn and scarred. This is because the First Ones were already engaged in an unending war against the Yingir, with them returning to inspect their charges and determine whether they were fit for the battle that lay ahead. The First Ones are known to have encouraged their younger race to focus their psychic abilities in order to create warp-derived beings as weapons against the vampiric gods of starlight. The battle that continued was long, and the First Ones dwindled in number to the point that they lost influence among the Eldar. Without their creator's wisdom, their psychic emissions in the warp changed from sentient weapons into living gods of the Immaterium, who were the first of their kind. After the absence of the First Ones, the Eldar heroes Eldanesh and Ulthanesh proved to be the only beings that could harness the power of the warp gods to battle against their foes until they fled from a demonic plague. In the aftermath, the Eldar are said to have adapted, refined and perfected the First One's skill in measuring the warp and predicting its movements. Now, the background book Xenology also makes a potential reference to the Old Ones. They are referred to as the Old Gods, who lived prior to the birth of Slaanesh, when they fought a war in heaven and hell against Star Devils. According to the author Corridor Salvador, the Star Devils emerged victorious in this war and killed all the Old Gods, though one managed to survive. This survivor hid away, where he continued his old ways of tweaking, dabbling, poking, and prodding. When he was done with his work, he departed into the warp in order to hide and watch. When she was born of the Long Ears, Slaanesh chopped the remaining Old One into millions of pieces, with the shards kicked into the cold void in order to linger like always. These shattered remnants, according to Corridor Salvador, became known as the Umbra. The entity that was sent to linger also shares many qualities to that of Kwa, a deity within the Hrud pantheon. And for the last tidbit of information from the Codex Necrons, explained that the Catan still hold an unbending hatred of the Old Ones, despite their civilization being no more, and actively seek out any degenerate descendants that may possibly exist on backwater worlds. Join me next time for the origins and rise of one of, if not the greatest human to have ever existed, the Emperor of Mankind.